Let me tell you a story about a man everyone once agreed was going nowhere. Not because he was lazy, not because he was stupid, but because nothing he touched ever seemed to work. His name was Daniel. Daniel grew up in a small town where success stories were rare and excuses were common. Teachers described him as quiet but average. Coaches benched him. Employers fired him. Even his friends, the few he had, eventually stopped inviting him to things. Not out of cruelty, but because Daniel always seemed tired, discouraged, and distant. By the time he turned 25, he had already failed at 3 jobs, dropped out of 2 schools, and ended 1 serious relationship. And every time something collapsed, he told himself the same thing. Baby, I'm just not built for success. But the truth was, Daniel wasn't lazy. He worked harder than most people. He just worked without direction. Every morning he woke up early, put on clothes he didn't like, and went to jobs he didn't care about. He tried to be good at them, he really did, but his heart wasn't there. And when your heart isn't there, people can tell, and eventually they stop believing in you. One evening, after getting fired from yet another job, this time from a warehouse, Daniel sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling. The room smelt faintly of instant noodles and cold coffee. His phone buzzed with messages he didn't want to open. Probably his parents. Probably another "Have you figured things out yet?" text. He whispered to himself, "I'm tired of failing." Not loudly, not dramatically, just tired. That night, something unusual happened. He couldn't sleep. Not because he was anxious, but because his mind wouldn't stop asking questions. What am I actually good at? What would I do if I wasn't afraid of wasting time? What would I try if no one could laugh at me? Those questions followed him into the morning. The next day, instead of searching for another random job online, Daniel opened the notebook he hadn't touched since college. On the first page, he wrote one sentence. What do I care about enough to stay bad at for a long time? He stared at that sentence for nearly an hour. Then, slowly, something surfaced. Stories. Daniel had always loved stories. As a kid, he wrote strange short tales in school notebooks. As a teenager, he stayed up late watching documentaries and interviews. As an adult, he listened to podcasts while working meaningless jobs, imagining what it would feel like to create something meaningful himself. But he'd never taken it seriously, because in his town, storytelling wasn't a career. It was a hobby, something people did on the side, after real work. Still, that morning, Daniel wrote another sentence. I want to tell stories. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel stupid writing it. He felt honest. So he made a small decision, not a life-changing one, not a dramatic leap, just a small one. He decided to write for 30 minutes every day. That was it. No promises of fame, no expectations of money, just 30 minutes. The first week, everything he wrote felt terrible. The sentences were awkward, the plots went nowhere. He deleted more than he saved. Some days, he stared at the blank screen until the 30 minutes were over and wrote nothing at all. And yet, he kept going. Not because he felt inspired, but because he was tired of quitting. Months passed. Nothing changed externally. He still lived in the same apartment, still struggled financially, still got ignored by people he sent his work to, still felt like an invisible person in a loud world. But internally, something was shifting. For the first time, Daniel felt ownership over something. Not responsibility, ownership. This was his. No boss, no deadlines, no one yelling, just him and the page. One night, nearly a year after he started writing daily, Daniel posted a short story online. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't promote it. He didn't even expect it to be read. He just posted it and went to sleep. The next morning, he had 3 notifications. 3. To most people, that would mean nothing. To Daniel, it meant everything. One comment said, "This made me feel less alone." Another said, "I don't know why, but I needed this today." The third just said, "Please write more." Daniel stared at his phone for a long time. Then he smiled. Not a big smile, not a dramatic one, quiet one. He kept writing. He started posting once a week, then twice, then every few days. Slowly, people started following him. Not thousands, not hundreds, just dozens. But they were real people, and they cared. One evening, Daniel received an email from a small online magazine. They wanted to publish one of his stories. They weren't offering much money, barely enough for groceries, but Daniel didn't care. He sat on his bed, holding his phone, rereading the email over and over, whispering, "They want my work. Not my resume, not my degree, not my past failures, my work." That night, he called his parents. His father said, cautiously, "So, is this a real job?" Daniel paused, then said, "It's real to me." There was silence on the line. Then his mother said softly, "We're proud of you." Daniel hung up and sat there in the dark, feeling something unfamiliar, relief. Not because he'd made it, but because he was finally becoming himself. The next 2 years weren't magical. He didn't become famous overnight. He didn't quit struggling financially. He didn't suddenly gain confidence. In fact, there were weeks he thought about quitting again. Weeks where his writing felt empty. Weeks where no one commented. Weeks where rejection emails piled up like unopened bills. But this time, quitting felt worse than continuing. Because now, quitting wouldn't just mean failure. It would mean abandoning something he loved. So he stayed. Then something strange happened. One of his stories, a short, quiet piece about a lonely man riding the same bus every night, went viral. Not explosively, not with headlines, but steadily. People shared it. Strangers messaged him. Someone translated it into another language without asking. A small podcast read it out loud. Within 2 months, Daniel had more readers than he ever imagined. Then came the emails. Publishers, editors, content creators. Not all of them furious, not all of them respectful, but some were real. One editor wrote, "You have a voice. It's raw, but honest. We'd like to develop it." Daniel stared at the screen, heart pounding. A voice. No one had ever said that about him before. He'd been called average, forgettable, quiet, never a voice. He accepted. That decision changed everything, slowly, quietly, without fireworks. He started working with an editor, learning structure, cutting unnecessary words, rewriting endings, understanding pacing. Most of his early work got rejected, again. But this time, rejection didn't feel like proof of worthlessness. It felt like part of the process. 3 years after writing his first 30-minute session, Daniel published his first book. Not a bestseller, not a sensation, just a book. Printed, bound, real. The day it arrived in the mail, he held it in his hands for a long time without opening it. He remembered every teacher who'd called him average, every employer who'd fired him, every friend who'd stopped calling. Every night he'd stared at the ceiling thinking, maybe I'm just not built for success. And yet, here it was, proof that he wasn't broken. He was just misaligned. The book sold modestly, but readers emailed him. One said, "Your story helped me survive a dark year." Another said, "I started writing because of you." Another said, "I finally felt seen." Those messages meant more to Daniel than any paycheck ever had. But the world doesn't stop there. 2 years later, a film student contacted him, asking to adapt one of his stories into a short film. Daniel almost said no, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't feel worthy. Then he remembered something. He remembered the warehouse job, the ceiling, the cold coffee, the sentence, "I'm tired of failing." And he realized this wasn't luck. This wasn't talent suddenly appearing. This was persistence finally being seen. He said yes. The short film did well at festivals. Then came interviews, then podcasts, then speaking invitations. People started calling Daniel an overnight success. Every time he heard that phrase, he smiled politely, because he knew the truth. His overnight success took nearly 10 years. 10 years of writing when no one was watching. 10 years of doubt. 10 years of choosing to stay bad long enough to become good. One evening, after giving a talk at a small university, a student approached him. She looked nervous. She said, "I feel like I'm failing at everything. Everyone else seems ahead. I don't know what I'm good at. What should I do?" Daniel thought for a moment. Then he said, "Find something you care about enough to be bad at for a long time." She blinked. "What?" He smiled. Most people quit not because they fail, but because they fail before anyone claps. If you can stay when no one is watching, when no one believes, when even you don't believe, that's when something real starts. She nodded slowly. "Did you always believe in yourself?" she asked. Daniel laughed quietly. "No," he said. "I just believed in continuing." That night, Daniel walked home alone through quiet streets. The city lights reflected on wet pavement. The air smelled like rain and electricity. He thought about the man he used to be, tired, invisible, convinced he wasn't built for success. And he realized something important. He hadn't become special. He hadn't become smarter. He hadn't suddenly become fearless. He had simply stopped quitting. That was it. No magic, no shortcuts, no secret, just the decision to stay. And that decision changed everything. So if you're listening to this right now feeling behind, forgotten, or convinced you're not meant for success, let me tell you something Daniel learned the hard way. Failure doesn't mean you're broken. It usually just means you're early. And sometimes the only difference between the person everyone gave up on and the person everyone admires is time and the courage to stay when quitting feels easier.